What if everything you know about staying dry in the wild is completely wrong? No jackets, no waterproof tents, yet for centuries, the indigenous peoples of North America survived even the heaviest downpours. They didn't rely on modern technology, they mastered nature itself. Today, I'm going to reveal the secrets they've guarded for generations, from bark that keeps entire shelters dry, to clothing and shoes treated with natural oils that repel water better than anything we have today. Stay with me, because what you're about to see will change the way you think about survival, forever. What if I told you that everything you've been taught about surviving in the rain is outdated? The indigenous peoples of North America didn't rely on Gore-Tex jackets or waterproof tents. Yet, for centuries, they lived in harmony with nature, staying dry even in the heaviest downpours. Their secrets weren't buried in technology, they were rooted in a deep understanding of the world around them. They read the forest like an open book, knowing exactly which trees would yield bark suitable for roofing and which wouldn't. Animals weren't just sources of food, they were resources for materials that could repel water better than any modern treatment. Their dwellings were designed so that the earth itself diverted water away. Watch this video all the way through, and you'll learn how a little fat in a strip of bark could replace an entire arsenal of modern camping gear, and why these ancient methods still outperform many of today's technologies. I'm going to reveal the most closely guarded secret of surviving in the forest. Staying dry didn't start with construction. It began with a silent conversation with the forest itself. Indigenous peoples knew that not every tree was willing to give up its bark. Choosing the right moment was key. They never stripped bark from a young or weak tree, understanding that it would damage the forest. The ideal candidate was a mature birch tree, perfectly situated. In springtime, its bark was elastic and rich in natural oils, making it a perfect, natural waterproofing material. Removing the bark was a ritual, a tribute to the spirit of the tree. Large strips were taken carefully, ensuring the inner layers remained intact so the tree could recover. It wasn't just resource gathering, it was an act of cooperation with nature. These birch bark layers became shingles for wigwams and the roofs of longhouses. They were layered like fish scales so rain would roll right off, never seeping through the slightest gap. This method was so effective that such a shelter could stay dry for years. The secret wasn't in construction techniques, it was in the bark itself. Birch bark contains a waxy substance called betulin, which not only repels water but also protects the material from rot. It was a natural membrane, perfected long before synthetic alternatives existed. Its flexibility allowed roofs of any shape, from conical wigwams to long, gabled Iroquois houses. Repairs were easy, just replace the damaged section with a fresh strip. It was modular, renewable, and remarkably durable. In other regions, elm or tuja bark was used, each tree offering unique properties. Craftsmen knew exactly how to work with each one. This knowledge was treasured and passed down through generations. Today, modern technologies try to replicate these solutions. Multi-layer membranes and water-repellent coatings are attempts to mimic what birch bark already did flawlessly. Nature had already created the perfect material, we just needed to learn how to use it. This approach highlights a fundamental difference in worldview. Rather than building artificial protection against nature, indigenous peoples integrated natural elements into their lives. They didn't fight the elements, they became part of them. If you want to learn a secret that will completely change your perspective on architecture, take a closer look at the teepees of the Great Plains tribes. At first glance, they seem simple, but their conical shape is the result of centuries of engineering, perfectly designed to withstand rain and wind. Unlike square structures, a cone has no flat surfaces for water to pool. Raindrops hitting the sloping skins immediately roll off, ensuring constant, effective drainage. The steep angle of the walls was carefully calculated so water couldn't seep through the seams between sewn bison hides. Water rolled off faster than it could be absorbed. The cone's aerodynamic shape made it incredibly resilient against strong winds, common during storms on the plains. Wind flowed around the teepee without putting pressure on it, keeping the covering intact and the frame secure. At the very center of the dwelling, directly under the smoke hole, sat the hearth. Warm air constantly rising created a slight draft, helping to dry any drops that got inside. The smoke from the fire also impregnated the hides, adding an extra layer of water resistance. Soot and resin filled the pores, forming a natural protective barrier. The skins themselves were carefully prepared and sewn. Women used bones and tendons to create tight, almost airtight seams. Each stitch accounted for how the material would behave in the rain. At the base, the skins could be lifted for ventilation or pressed down with stones during heavy downpours. This simple adjustment system controlled the microclimate inside the tepee, protecting not just from rain falling from above, but also from water creeping in from below. The tepee's simplicity and mobility were not primitive, they were the peak of functional design. Every detail served a purpose, with nothing superfluous. This ingenious simplicity allowed people to survive in harsh conditions where the weather could shift in minutes. Do you think complex technological solutions are always better than simple, elegant methods perfected over centuries? Next, we'll reveal a nearly invisible waterproof material you could carry with you, something you've probably never seen before. When it comes to waterproofing, most people think of leather or bark, but indigenous peoples used a resource that was practically invisible yet incredibly effective: processed animal intestines. The intestines and bladders of large animals, like bison or elk, were meticulously cleaned and stretched into thin, translucent, waterproof sheets. Every part of the animal was used, nothing was wasted. These sheets were sewn together with fine tendons to make large, lightweight waterproof capes, bags for dry storage, or even temporary shelter windows. They were far lighter and more flexible than leather. Worn over clothing, they were almost unnoticeable, yet completely protected against heavy rain. After use, they could be rolled up small and stored in a bag, the 18th century equivalent of today's ultralight membrane jacket. Bladders were also ideal for carrying water, keeping it fresh and leak-free. Some tribes, like the Elets of the Northwest, sewed entire waterproof suits from marine mammal intestines. A hunter in a kayak could stay dry even in stormy seas. The uniqueness of this material came from its natural composition. Collagen and elastin made it tear-resistant and fully functional even when wet. It was a natural polymer, evolved over millennia. This knowledge demonstrates the deep understanding indigenous peoples had of anatomy and materials. They could create high-tech solutions without factories or labs. Nature was the lab, a sharp knife the tool, and skilled hands the engineers. Now, imagine a time machine taking us to the moment before building the most reliable shelter. The very first step was choosing the right location. This was crucial for staying dry, based on generations of observing nature. No experienced person would build in a low-lying area or the bed of a dry creek. They knew heavy rains would turn these spots into torrents or deep puddles. Reading the terrain was an essential skill. A small hill with gentle slopes was ideal, ensuring natural drainage from all sides. Even during floods, the dwelling remained on a dry island. Wind direction was also considered. Entrances were placed on the leeward side so slanting rain wouldn't blow inside. Dense groups of trees could act as natural umbrellas, but old or dead trees were avoided due to falling branch hazards. Soil mattered too. Sandy soil absorbed water quickly, clay soil could flood easily. Indigenous peoples observed every detail of the environment. They tracked where puddles lingered and where the ground dried fastest. Before setting up camp, they might spend hours studying the area, looking at past floods, riverbanks, and terrain contours. For nomadic plains tribes, this knowledge was vital. One poor choice of location could ruin comfort and possessions. Choosing a site wasn't just practical, it was a philosophy of living in harmony with nature. Instead of fighting water, they moved around it. But what if the perfect location wasn't available? That's where drainage came in. A shallow ditch was always dug around the dwelling, whether a tepee or a longhouse. Water flowing toward the shelter was intercepted and redirected. The depth and width of the ditch depended on terrain slope and soil type. Steeper slopes meant deeper trenches, flat terrain required shallower ones. Collected water was carefully guided to natural low points to prevent stagnation. Earth dug from the ditch was often piled along the inner edge, forming an extra barrier. In longhouse villages, these ditches became part of the larger drainage system, protecting streets and entire neighborhoods from turning into swamps after heavy rains. Maintaining them was simple but essential. Removing leaves and debris kept the system functional. Tools were basic, digging sticks or large animal bone shovels. The real tool was knowledge, the physics of water and gravity applied wisely. Next came clothing and footwear. Staying dry wasn't just about shelter, it was about personal protection. Indigenous peoples treated leather and suede with animal fats, bear, bison, or moose fat, turning ordinary clothing into waterproof gear. Leather was rubbed with warm fat, absorbed into pores, then often smoked over fire. This polymerized the fat, creating durable, flexible, water-resistant clothing that didn't stiffen in the cold. Moccasins received the same treatment. Thick leather was treated with fat and smoked, then filled with dry materials like grass or moss, which absorbed any moisture. Wet filling could be replaced on the move. In swampy regions, high leather gaiters prevented water from entering from above. Every detail, down to the feet, was thought through to ensure dryness and comfort. But staying dry wasn't just about clothing. Fire was essential. Kindling was carried in waterproof containers made of fat-treated leather or birch bark. Portable smoldering coals, sometimes from dried fungi, allowed fires to be started even in heavy rain. Dead lower branches of conifers, protected by tree canopies, provided dry wood. Fires were built gradually, starting small and drying wood before it fully caught, a careful, step-by-step process. Fire provided warmth, dried clothes, and kept morale high. It was the heart of the camp. Now let's talk about clothing beyond leather. On the northwest coast of America, where rain falls almost constantly, indigenous peoples had a unique solution: red cedar bark. Tribes like the Tlingit and Haida learned to turn it into waterproof clothing, capes, raincoats, and conical hats. The process was meticulous. The inner layer of cedar bark consists of long, strong fibers. In spring, when sap flow was at its peak, the bark could be carefully separated from the trunk in long strips without harming the tree. These strips were soaked to make them soft and elastic. Women then painstakingly separated the fibers by hand, demonstrating extraordinary patience and skill. The fibers were woven so densely that rain simply rolled off the surface. Natural oils in cedar added another layer of water resistance. The vertical arrangement of fibers created channels for water to drain, mimicking a tiled roof. The result? Lightweight, flexible clothing that didn't stiffen when wet and dried quickly, perfect for fishermen and hunters. Cedar bark hats, wide-brimmed and conical, kept rain away from the face and neck. Other regions used local plants with strong fibers, like reeds or yucca, following the same principle: tight weaving plus natural water-repellent properties. This approach shows that functional, waterproof clothing didn't require animal products, it could be achieved with what grew underfoot. Though it took weeks to produce, the garments lasted for years, reliably protecting their owner. Even the best bison hide coverings could leak over time, especially at seams. To counter this, tepee dwellers used a special inner canopy called the ozan, a secondary roof suspended above the living area. Made of finely crafted leather, it caught any drips and directed them to the walls and then outside. The ozan created a second line of defense, protecting sleeping areas, food, and firewood. The ozan also improved thermal insulation and airflow. Smoke from the hearth was channeled efficiently, keeping the interior comfortable. Some ozans were decorated with symbols depicting hunting scenes or important family events, turning a practical element into a cultural chronicle. Lightweight, removable, and easy to clean, the ozan was a multifunctional marvel, a testament to thoughtful design. Footwear, too, followed careful planning. Moccasins were fat-treated and smoked, layered with dry grass or moss as insoles to absorb moisture. Wet insoles could be replaced, keeping feet dry and warm. In some regions, additional leather coverings acted as waterproof shells, and gaiters protected the trouser tops. Every layer worked together, an entire system dedicated to comfort and survival. Finally, fire management was crucial. Kindling was stored in waterproof containers, and portable smoldering coals allowed quick ignition even in storms. Dry wood was selected strategically, protected by tree canopies or standing upright to stay dry. Fire was built gradually, allowing wood to dry before it fully ignited. Fire wasn't just heat, it was a tool for drying, cooking, and maintaining morale. It was the heart of the camp. With these strategies, shelter, clothing, footwear, fire, and terrain knowledge, indigenous peoples could thrive in the harshest conditions. Every element was part of a holistic system, blending ingenuity, deep environmental understanding, and respect for nature. We've seen 10 remarkable survival methods: birch bark roofs, drainage systems, cedar bark clothing, fat-based waterproofing, the ozone, layered footwear, and fire management. But staying dry wasn't just about materials, it was about mindset and observation. Indigenous peoples approached the environment with patience and attention. Every choice, from selecting a campsite to harvesting bark, was deliberate. They understood water flow, soil behavior, and forest patterns. A small hill with gentle slopes, the right wind orientation, a natural canopy of trees, these weren't coincidences, they were carefully considered strategies that kept their homes dry even in extreme weather. Even when the perfect location wasn't available, they adapted. Shallow ditches diverted water away from homes, while embankments acted as secondary barriers. Streets and villages were designed with drainage in mind, preventing flooding. These were simple techniques, but applied intelligently, they transformed ordinary landscapes into dry, livable spaces. Clothing, footwear, and fire worked together as a complete system. Leather and plant-based garments kept rain out, layered moccasins kept feet dry, portable coals and stored kindling ensured warmth and mobility. Every detail, no matter how small, contributed to survival. What stands out is not just the cleverness of each solution, but the philosophy behind them. Indigenous peoples didn't try to dominate nature, they worked with it. They used every part of an animal, every fiber of a plant, and every contour of the land to create a sustainable, efficient, and harmonious system. There was no waste, only purpose. This approach contrasts sharply with modern consumerist solutions, which often rely on synthetic materials, mass production, and disposable items. The ingenuity of the past reminds us that sometimes, simplicity and observation can outperform complexity and technology. The lessons go beyond survival. They teach us about respect, patience, and deep understanding of the world around us. The strategies of indigenous peoples weren't just practical, they were philosophical, guiding their interaction with the environment and each other. By studying these methods, we gain more than historical knowledge, we gain insights into sustainable living, resourcefulness, and resilience. They challenge us to reconsider what we think we know about protection, comfort, and efficiency. In the end, staying dry was never just about rain, it was about learning to read the world, anticipate challenges, and act with intention. It was a holistic practice, combining knowledge, skill, and respect. And even today, these principles can inspire modern approaches to architecture, clothing, and environmental design. What would you do differently if you adopted this perspective? How could understanding natural systems reshape the way you live, work, or explore the outdoors? These are the questions that the wisdom of indigenous peoples invites us to ask. Beyond staying dry, indigenous peoples mastered mobility and adaptability. They knew that weather could change within minutes, and their shelters, clothing, and tools reflected that. Everything was portable, modular, and easy to repair. A tepee could be taken down and reassembled in a new location within hours. Roofs of birch bark shingles could be replaced without rebuilding the entire structure. Clothing treated with fat or woven from cedar bark could be adjusted or layered depending on conditions. Their resourcefulness extended to water management. Even when they couldn't dig a ditch or find the perfect slope, they found ways to channel water safely away from living areas. Small earthworks, simple trenches, and clever placement of natural obstacles allowed them to control runoff and prevent flooding. Every element of the environment was analyzed and utilized, not conquered. Indigenous peoples also understood fire like no one else. Fire was not just for warmth or cooking, it was a survival tool. They carried smoldering coals to start fires anywhere, kept tinder dry in waterproof containers, and built fire pits designed to stay lit even in the rain. They used local materials like moss, bark, and fungi to create portable and long-lasting sources of heat. Fire and water, two opposing forces, were managed with equal skill, balancing survival and comfort. Even their footwear and clothing were part of this system. Layered moccasins, treated leathers, cedar bark capes, and waterproofed garments worked together to protect them from wet conditions. Every stitch, seam, and layer was intentional, designed to maximize protection while maintaining mobility. Nothing was wasted, nothing was random. The philosophy behind these methods is as important as the methods themselves. Indigenous peoples lived in harmony with their surroundings. They didn't try to bend nature to their will, they learned its patterns, respected its power, and incorporated its resources into their daily lives. This approach not only ensured survival but fostered sustainability, resilience, and a profound understanding of the world. Modern survival gear and synthetic materials may be convenient, but they rarely match the elegance, efficiency, and sustainability of these traditional practices. There's a reason many of these methods remained effective for centuries, passed down from one generation to the next. They are the product of observation, experimentation, and deep respect for life. In the next chapter, we'll explore one of the most overlooked techniques, how indigenous people stayed dry and warm even during the coldest, wettest winters without modern fabrics or insulated jackets. This technique is subtle, ingenious, and a perfect example of how human ingenuity works hand in hand with nature. When winter rains turned into snow and freezing conditions, indigenous peoples relied on insulation methods that were both simple and remarkably effective. They didn't depend on synthetic fabrics or industrial insulation, instead, they layered natural materials to trap heat and keep moisture out. Animal furs, grasses, moss, and even cedar bark were combined in ingenious ways to create garments and bedding that were lightweight yet incredibly warm. For example, bedding inside a dwelling was often built in layers. Soft moss or dried grasses were used as an insulating base, topped with animal skins treated with fat to repel moisture. This created a warm, dry sleeping surface that could be maintained and renewed with minimal effort. These beds weren't just functional, they were carefully crafted tools for survival, ensuring that the body retained heat during harsh nights. Clothing followed a similar philosophy. Multiple layers were used, each with a specific purpose. The innermost layer absorbed sweat while maintaining dryness, middle layers provided insulation, outer layers were treated to resist water and wind. Every material was chosen for its properties, and every garment was customized for the wearer's activity and environment. Movement, hunting, and daily chores were never restricted, even in heavy snow or driving rain. Even simple items like gloves, hats, and foot coverings were optimized. Mittens were often stuffed with insulating plant fibers or animal hair, creating a barrier that kept fingers flexible yet warm. Boots and moccasins were layered and treated to repel water while allowing breathability. Indigenous peoples understood that extremities were vulnerable and designed solutions accordingly. Their attention to detail extended to shelter interiors as well. Snow and rain were not only managed outside the dwelling but also inside. Smoke from fires was carefully controlled to dry walls and roofs treated with fat, bark, or natural resins. Ventilation and airflow were subtly adjusted to keep condensation from forming, while maintaining warmth. The combination of layered clothing, insulated bedding, and controlled airflow created a microclimate that was far more comfortable than what modern materials alone could achieve. These techniques weren't isolated tricks, they were part of a holistic understanding of the environment. Each choice, from material selection to layering and positioning, reflected centuries of observation and adaptation. Indigenous peoples didn't fight winter, they worked with it. They respected its power, harnessed its patterns, and used what nature provided to thrive even in extreme conditions. By studying these methods, we see that survival is not just about tools, it's about knowledge, observation, and respect. The lessons of layering, insulation, and moisture management remain just as relevant today, reminding us that sometimes the most advanced technology is the one humanity has always had at hand, understanding and working with nature. Water is life, but carrying it safely in a wet environment is a challenge many of us overlook. Indigenous peoples of North America mastered this problem centuries before modern containers existed. They didn't rely on plastic or metal, instead, they turned to what was available: animal bladders, gourds, birch bark, and carefully treated hides. Every container was designed with both functionality and portability in mind. Animal bladders and stomachs, thoroughly cleaned and treated, became flexible, waterproof reservoirs. They could be inflated slightly, creating a soft, durable container that didn't leak. These bladders were lightweight, easy to carry, and could hold water for days without contamination. They also doubled as temporary flotation devices or storage for other essentials in emergencies. Birch bark containers were another ingenious solution. Strips of bark were carefully folded and sewn into cups, buckets, or even larger storage vessels. The natural oils in the bark made them resistant to water while remaining surprisingly light. These containers were renewable and easy to repair, reflecting the sustainable approach indigenous peoples maintained with every resource. Portable hydration systems were often combined with clever methods of purification. Sand, charcoal, or certain plant fibers were used to filter debris and improve water quality. The act of carrying water became an exercise in engineering, observation, and adaptation to the environment. Even the placement of water containers in camps demonstrated strategic thinking. They were stored near sleeping areas but slightly elevated to prevent contamination from runoff or mud. Containers were sometimes covered with leaves or bark to prevent freezing in winter or overheating in summer. Every detail reflected a deep understanding of both natural laws and human needs. This wasn't just survival, it was optimization. Indigenous peoples developed systems that allowed constant access to clean water, even while traveling through challenging terrain or enduring heavy rainfall. They understood that hydration is a constant concern and that managing it efficiently could mean the difference between comfort and disaster. By examining these methods, we see a recurring theme: they leveraged natural materials, optimized their environment, and created multifunctional tools that modern technology still struggles to replicate. The elegance of their solutions lies in simplicity, sustainability, and a profound connection to the land. These lessons are still applicable today. Whether you're planning a long hike, living off the grid, or simply curious about survival, understanding how to safely transport and store water using the principles observed by indigenous peoples can change your approach to hydration entirely. Staying warm and dry goes hand in hand with survival, and fire was the heart of that balance for indigenous peoples. But building and maintaining a fire in a rain-soaked forest required skill, foresight, and ingenuity. Every step was purposeful, from carrying tinder to selecting firewood. The first secret was portable tinder. Indigenous peoples stored dry kindling in waterproof containers made of fat-treated leather or birch bark. Inside, they kept moss, wood shavings, or crushed bark, materials that would ignite even in damp conditions. But the most remarkable tool was the smoldering coal. Carefully preserved in clay pots, hollowed horns, or specially constructed containers, this tiny ember could be transported for hours or even days. It allowed a fire to be reignited almost instantly at a new campsite, saving precious time and energy. Next came firewood selection. Not all dead wood is equal. The lower branches of conifers, protected by the dense canopy, remained dry even in pouring rain. Upright dead trees also kept their cores dry, and splitting these branches revealed usable wood that could burn reliably. The process was meticulous but essential for long-term survival. Fire building itself was strategic. A small stone or log shelter protected the initial flames from wind and rain. Fires were started with the driest, finest kindling and gradually fed larger pieces, ensuring they ignited steadily. Each stage was controlled to optimize combustion while conserving energy and resources. The fire was more than warmth, it was a tool for drying clothes, curing leather, smoking meat, and creating a safe, comfortable camp. Indigenous peoples also understood the art of layering and positioning. Logs were arranged to maximize airflow, prevent smothering, and maintain consistent heat. Even the smallest adjustments could make the difference between a failing fire and one that would sustain an entire family through a stormy night. This mastery of fire illustrates a central principle: survival is not about brute force or luck, it's about observation, preparation, and leveraging natural laws. Each ember, each stick, and each spark was part of a system designed to work in harmony with the environment. Through these techniques, indigenous peoples turned a challenge that modern campers might dread into a reliable and sustainable system. They didn't just survive, they thrived, adapting their skills to every season, every rainfall, and every type of terrain. Fire was life, but managing it wisely was the difference between comfort and hardship, safety and danger. It was a testament to patience, skill, and a profound understanding of nature's rhythms. Keeping your feet dry was as critical as staying dry overall. Wet feet could freeze in winter or cause serious infections, so indigenous peoples devised ingenious solutions with layered footwear and proper treatment. The foundation was moccasins made from thick, yet soft leather. But even the best leather isn't naturally waterproof. That's where preparation came in. Like their clothing, moccasins were impregnated with fat from animals such as bears, bison, or moose. The fat was rendered carefully, purified, and rubbed deep into the leather, filling its pores. Afterward, the moccasins were often smoked over a smoky fire. This smoking not only darkened the leather and added a distinctive scent, but it also polymerized the fats, making the shoes water-resistant, durable, and flexible. They wouldn't stiffen in cold or crack over time. The inner lining of moccasins was another clever innovation. A thick layer of dry material, usually moss or grass, acted as insulation and absorbed any moisture that seeped through. Your feet stayed in contact with dry material, not wet leather. After a long journey through wet terrain, the wet lining could simply be replaced with fresh dry material at the next stop. This system allowed moccasins to dry from the inside out without building a fire, a simple yet brilliant solution. In swampy or wet regions, additional shoe covers made of coarser, thicker waterproof leather were worn over moccasins, creating a second layer of protection. Even the connection between pants and shoes was guarded with high gaiters or leather wraps, preventing water from flowing in from above. Every detail was intentional, designed to keep the feet dry and comfortable in even the harshest conditions. But staying dry didn't stop at clothing and footwear. Fire was essential, not just for warmth, but for drying clothes and keeping the camp livable. Indigenous peoples mastered portable fire techniques and carefully selected dry kindling. Smoldering coals could be preserved for hours, even days, in specially prepared containers. They used tinder fungi, which could burn slowly like a cigar, making it possible to transport fire without wasting precious resources. Even in a wet forest, they knew how to find dry firewood. Dead lower branches protected by the canopy stayed dry, and upright standing dead trees preserved their cores. Selecting, splitting, and gradually feeding these logs to the fire ensured a steady, reliable flame. Fire management was both art and science, a combination of observation, patience, and understanding combustion. Through these techniques, indigenous peoples created a complete system for staying dry and warm. Every element, footwear, clothing, fire, was interwoven into a larger strategy for survival. It wasn't just improvisation, it was a carefully honed science developed over generations, refined through observation and experience. Moving beyond animal-based materials, indigenous peoples also mastered plant-based waterproofing. On the rainy northwest coast of America, where the Tlingit, Haida, and other tribes lived, nature offered an incredible resource: red cedar bark. This material was transformed into clothing that could repel water as effectively as treated animal hides. The inner layers of cedar bark or bast consisted of long, strong fibers. In spring, when the sap flowed most actively, the bark could be stripped from the trunk in long sheets without harming the tree. These strips were soaked in water to soften and increase their elasticity. Women of the tribe painstakingly separated the fibers by hand, creating threads fine enough to weave into garments. The weaving was dense and precise. Rainwater would roll off the surface of a cloak, hat, or raincoat without penetrating the fibers. The natural oils in cedar added extra water resistance, and the arrangement of the fibers created tiny channels for drainage, much like a miniature roof system built into clothing. Each garment was lightweight, flexible, and allowed full mobility, crucial for fishermen, hunters, and travelers. Cedar bark hats were especially remarkable. Their wide brims and conical shapes kept water away from the face and neck, providing practical protection while showcasing craftsmanship. Beyond cedar, other plants with long, strong fibers, like certain reeds or yucca, were used in regions where cedar was scarce. The principle was universal, tight weaving combined with natural water-repellent properties. Creating a single cloak could take weeks of patient, meticulous work. But the result lasted for years, reliably shielding its wearer from relentless rain. Even the most carefully treated bison hide could eventually leak, especially along seams, so plant-based solutions offered a sustainable alternative. To address leaks in dwellings, tribes developed another ingenious feature, the inner canopy, or ozan. Hung from the roof poles at human height, it didn't cover the entire interior but sat above living areas. Its main purpose was to catch drops that penetrated the outer covering. Water would slide down the ozan to the walls and outside, keeping sleeping areas, food, and firewood dry. The ozan also improved air circulation, creating a thermal buffer that kept homes warmer in winter and cooler in summer. Some were even decorated with painted symbols, hunting scenes or family chronicles, turning a simple protective layer into a functional and cultural centerpiece of the home. This combination of plant-based clothing and ingenious dwelling design demonstrates the holistic, integrated approach indigenous peoples had toward water management. Every element was thoughtful, sustainable, and effective, a testament to centuries of observation, adaptation, and respect for the natural world. Keeping your feet dry in the rain was another critical challenge. Wet feet could quickly freeze and cause serious health problems. Indigenous peoples solved this with clever layering and careful shoe treatment. The foundation was moccasins made of thick, soft leather. But even the best leather wasn't inherently waterproof, so it needed special preparation. Like clothing, moccasins were treated with animal fat and then smoked over a smoky fire. This made the leather water-resistant, flexible, and durable. The process was repeated regularly to maintain protection. But the real secret was the inner filling, a thick layer of dry material, usually grass or moss, served as both insulation and a sponge, absorbing any moisture that penetrated the seams or top of the shoe. This inner layer kept the wearer's feet in contact with dry material instead of wet leather. After a long journey, the wet grass could simply be replaced with fresh dry moss, making the shoes quick-drying and reusable. In some regions, a second layer of coarser leather was worn over the moccasins, creating an additional barrier against mud and water. High leather gaiters or wraps protected the tops of the moccasins, preventing water from seeping in from above. All these techniques combined created a complete system to keep feet warm and dry, even in swampy or flooded terrain. Comfort truly started from the ground up. Staying dry on the outside was only half the battle, maintaining fire and warmth was equally vital. How could one keep tinder dry in a torrential downpour or find usable firewood in a wet forest? The secret lay in portable, protected fire supplies. Dry kindling was stored in waterproof containers made of fat-treated leather or birch bark. Moss, bark dust, and crushed wood were kept ready for instant ignition. Smoldering coals were preserved for hours, or even days, in specially ventilated containers that limited oxygen but kept the embers alive. Certain fungi, known for their slow-burning cores, served as portable fire starters, allowing a new fire to be lit instantly at a campsite. Even the collection of firewood was strategic. Dead branches high in conifer trees remained dry, protected by the dense canopy above. Standing dead wood was ideal, as water ran off the trunk, keeping the core dry. Fires were built step by step. A small protected fire was lit first, gradually fed with larger pieces of wood that dried in place before catching flame. This patient, methodical approach ensured warmth and safety, even in relentless rain. Mastery of fire, combined with waterproof clothing, layered footwear, and clever dwelling designs, gave indigenous peoples an extraordinary ability to remain dry, warm, and mobile. Every element, from materials to techniques, was a testament to observation, adaptation, and intimate knowledge of nature. By now, we've explored 10 unique methods that allowed indigenous peoples of North America to stay dry and comfortable under extreme conditions. From birch bark roofs and sophisticated drainage systems to cedar bark clothing and fat-based waterproofing, every solution was simple yet remarkably effective. But these practices were more than just clever life hacks. They reflected a deep philosophy of living in harmony with nature. Instead of battling the elements, indigenous peoples observed and used natural laws to their advantage. Every material, every technique, every choice was informed by centuries of experience, careful observation, and respect for the world around them. The use of natural materials, from flexible birch bark to waterproof leather, from cedar fibers to animal intestines, demonstrates their intimate understanding of chemistry, anatomy, and physics long before laboratories existed. Nothing was wasted, every part of a resource had a purpose, turning what modern society might discard into essential survival tools. Even the placement of dwellings and the management of water flows reflected an advanced ecological intelligence. Nomadic tribes could read terrain like a map, choosing the safest spots for temporary shelters and using simple drainage systems to divert water away from homes. Their survival strategies combined practicality with elegance, ensuring safety, comfort, and efficiency. This holistic approach reminds us that many modern challenges, climate adaptation, resource management, and sustainable living, already have solutions in the natural world. Indigenous knowledge wasn't primitive, it was optimized for function, resilience, and harmony with the environment. So, what other topics from the daily life and skills of indigenous peoples would you like to see explored? Their world is filled with lessons that could transform the way we think about survival, technology, and our relationship with nature. Share your ideas in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to follow more amazing stories that reveal the wisdom of a people who mastered living with, rather than against, the forces of the natural world. As we reach the end of our journey into the survival wisdom of indigenous North Americans, it becomes clear that their mastery over rain, water, and wet conditions was not just about materials or tools, it was about a mindset. Every decision, from choosing the right tree to harvesting bark at the perfect moment, to preparing clothing and shoes for moisture, reflects patience, observation, and respect for nature's rules. They turn necessity into innovation. A simple layer of fat, a carefully sewn intestine, or a woven cedar cloak could outperform modern equipment in function and efficiency. The genius lay in understanding the inherent properties of natural materials and using them thoughtfully, rather than relying on artificial substitutes. This knowledge teaches us something profound: survival isn't just about resisting nature, it's about cooperating with it. The lessons of these techniques go beyond staying dry, they reveal a philosophy of life that values sustainability, attentiveness, and creativity. Imagine applying even a fraction of this mindset today. The ways we interact with our environment, manage resources, and design tools could become more sustainable and elegant if we take cues from those who lived in harmony with the natural world for centuries. So, what can we learn from these ancient technologies? How can we bring a similar respect and ingenuity into modern life, whether it's in architecture, clothing, or daily survival skills? Reflect on these questions, share your thoughts in the comments, and remember, sometimes, the answers to our modern challenges have already been discovered, long ago, in the forests, plains, and rivers of the past. Watch closely, and you might just discover that nature has always been the greatest teacher. Share your ideas in the comments and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new amazing stories from These incredible survival secrets show just how deeply the indigenous peoples understood nature, and how much we can still learn from them today. Imagine carrying centuries of wisdom in your backpack, staying dry no matter the storm. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and turn on notifications. Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter of these amazing survival stories. Join us, and let's explore the survival secrets of Native Americans together.